The think tank, the Free Market Foundation, says that an assessment on the economic impact of expropriation should be conducted. For more on this, I'm joined on the line by Martin van Staden, a legal researcher at the Free Market Foundation. Mr. van Staden, good to have you with us this afternoon. Give us reasons why you believe an economic assessment needs to be put in place. What do you hope to find from that process?
Well, in the first place, it is international best practice for any new instrument, be it a policy, a regulation, or new legislation, to be subjected to an environmental impact assessment, which essentially says what the effect of this new government intervention in society will be on the economy, on social affairs, etc. And South Africa followed suit in 2015 when Cabinet adopted a policy that is housed within the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, which said that any new legislation, any new regulation, any new policy must have an impact assessment accompanying it. And that is important. South Africans have to know what the likely effect or consequences of new government programs are going to be, especially on the economy, but also what might be the unforeseeable or the unforeseen consequences that might be detrimental, that we're not necessarily thinking about explicitly, but which researchers and so on can find. So this is policy in South Africa, but even regardless of that, it is really best practice to quantify what the result could be and will be of the interventions that we are adopting now. And I think on expropriation without compensation, it is all the more important because this is not just legislation that could be adopted and reversed tomorrow by the same parliamentary majority, but in fact a constitutional amendment, which is a far more cumbersome process, far more public participation, as we've heard, a far longer process. So if we do it, it will be very difficult to undo it. So it's far more important for us to know now what the consequences could be. And I think Parliament should have, or government should have done this a year ago, 2 years ago, when the idea was first mooted. But unfortunately, there has been no impact assessment up to now. And that is a cause for great concern, given that it seems like the committee is looking to finalize the process relatively soon.
One of the assumptions that you, as the Free Market Society, has made regarding this is that this reversal is likely to impact the poor in a disadvantageous way. Break that down for us. How so?
Of course. So one of the greatest injustices of apartheid was its denial of private property rights to mostly black South Africans. I think that is very clear today, pushing black South Africans into townships and informal settlements and into the former homelands where poverty is the name of the game. And in the 1990s, we decided to entrench private property rights in the Constitution, ensuring that everyone shares in private property rights, so that government cannot just arbitrarily continue with what the apartheid government did. But we know that the effects of what the apartheid government did not just evaporate overnight. We still have a very poor population as a result of the apartheid government's policies. And now we have that situation where if expropriation without compensation is adopted, and compensation is no longer constitutionally required in every single circumstance, then you have the situation where when poor individuals' property is expropriated, and rest assured that it will be for public infrastructure processes, etc. This is why the expropriation power inevitably exists globally. It will be the poor who struggle the most to litigate for compensation. Now, this follows. If a rich individual's farm, for instance, is expropriated, that individual can litigate. You can take the process to court. You can keep the government busy for weeks, months, years in order to get the compensation that they want. But if an informal settlement or a part of a township, for instance, needs to be expropriated for a dam, a bridge, a highway, then those individuals living there will not have that same luxury. That is why it is extremely important to guarantee to everyone the right to compensation under all circumstances, which is an internationally accepted basic human right. If the moment we start watering down that accepted right, then we have the situation where the poor will be the hardest hit, regardless of whatever the intentions or the stated intentions of the current government is. We just know that the rich will be able to litigate, and if they lose, they can leave the country, but the poor will not be able to litigate. They'll need to be dependent on the state's good graces and on legal aid services, and that is simply an unacceptable state of affairs.
Are you then, in this type of scenario and in the example that you pointed out, looking at the future ramifications of what the amendment of Section 25 would have? So not necessarily the intention of government now, but rather what the future application of this particular amended Section 25 would have on the poor?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing we have to remember is that this is an amendment to the Constitution. This is not simply a policy of the ANC government, because the ANC government is not always necessarily going to be the government of South Africa. President Ramaphosa is not always going to be the president, and the Minister of Land Reform is not always going to have that position. There can be many changes in government. It could be a whole new party. It could be totally different individuals with different intentions from the good intentions that the current government may have. And that we simply don't know what could happen down the line. And that's the reason why we need an impact assessment to say, look, if we adopt this policy and there's an evil government, for instance, a totalitarian state takes over in the future, what powers would this government have, and what would the ramifications of that be on the poor? We do have to have a long-term view as regards the consequences of expropriation without compensation. And currently, we are largely in the dark, and we cannot help but assume the worst, because we have to plan for the worst, even though we really hope for the best.
As you said earlier on, this train has already bolted off from the platform. The ad hoc committee that is looking into the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution is hearing the public hearings today. Are you part of those processes at all, where you're putting forward what the possible ramifications of this from the perspective that you hold?
Yes, so the Free Market Foundation and many other organizations that share our perspective have been involved in the constitutional amendment public participation process from the start. That was in February 2018. We have done multiple submissions to government on expropriation without compensation, and we have from the start insisted that there must be an impact assessment. And we really do hope that the committee, but not only the committee, but also the Department of Public Works and the Department of Land Reform, take note and realize we have made a mistake by not quantifying the consequences of what we're busy with here. And before we proceed in any way to amend the Constitution, we need to conduct a very thorough, detailed, and honest study and inform South Africans of what the potential foreseen and unforeseen consequences of expropriation without compensation might be on the economy, but specifically on the poorest of the poor.
Mr. van Staden, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Martin van Staden from the Free Market Foundation, giving their perspective on the possible ramifications of the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. Should there be other different parties governing the country in the long term, how will that then affect the poor? Should they be dispossessed of their land? Does that then mean that they will not be getting any sort of compensation should this amendment indeed be effective?